History is filled with emperors and rulers that enjoyed long, sometimes prosperous reigns. This list is not about them. Instead, we're counting down the kings and queens whose rule was cut short long before they could do anything noteworthy for their kingdoms. In fact, other than the dubious distinction of being the shortest-lived rulers ever, most of them would have no major impact on the course of history. Number 10. Yuan Shikai, 83 days. Yuan Shikai came into power in the last years of the Chinese Qing dynasty before it was overthrown by the popular Xinhai Revolution of 1911. By 1912, he had negotiated the position of president with the revolutionaries in exchange for the abdication of the last Qing emperor, a 5-year-old child named Pu Yi. It's a long story. As president, Shikai attempted to pass reforms that gave him sweeping powers in the new republic, as the new parliamentary system severely weakened his hold on the government. In November 1915, he declared himself the new emperor of China, even floating his own new dynasty called Hongxian. The power grab wasn't received well by the various provinces across China, 2 of which rose up in open rebellion. Shikai was forced to give up the throne in March 1916 after reigning for less than 3 months. Number 9. Edward V, 78 days. Edward V succeeded Edward IV as King of England in April 1483 during one of the most tumultuous times in the country's history. Now known as the War of the Roses, it was a bloody civil war between 2 royal factions, Lancaster and York, that lasted for over 3 decades. At the time of succession in April 1483, Edward V was merely 12 years old, making him one of the youngest monarchs in England's history. While the conflict would take many forms in the coming years, Edward V's story would tragically end barely 2.5 months after his succession. He was declared illegitimate by his protector and subsequent King of England, Richard III, in June of 1483 and sent to the Tower of London along with his younger brother. No one knows exactly what happened to them there, though it's assumed that they were murdered on the order of the king. Number 8. Gordian I and II, 22 days. Back in 238 AD, the Roman Empire was ruled by Maximinus Thrax, a widely hated monarch whose military campaigns and strict taxation policies were despised by almost everyone in the empire. In early April, the northern African province called Africa Proconsularis rose up in revolt, electing its 80-year-old governor, Gordian I, and his son, Gordian II, as new joint emperors of Rome. The accession was formally supported by the Roman Senate in early April, though that wouldn't help much as Gordian II was militarily defeated and killed by another Roman governor allied with Maximus. When he got to know about his son's death, Gordian I committed suicide on May the 12th, ending the joint reign that lasted only 22 days. Number 7. Lady Jane Grey, 9 days. Lady Jane Grey's reign in England began more than 6 decades after the Wars of the Roses, which ended with a military victory of Henry VII and the rise of the Tudor dynasty. While she didn't have the best claim to the throne, as she was only the first cousin to King Edward VI after his death in 1553, she was a Protestant. The Reformation was still ongoing across Europe, and Edward VI was instrumental in steering England towards Protestantism. Lady Jane Grey was crowned on the 10th of July 1553, though sadly her reign would end in tragedy almost as soon as it began. On July the 19th, 9 days after her accession, the throne was seized by Edward VI's sister Mary, who had a better claim to the throne. As she was a staunch Catholic allied with the other Catholic factions of Europe, her reign is still remembered for mass persecution of Protestants across England. As for Lady Jane Grey, she was charged with treason against the crown in November and executed by beheading in February 1554. Number 6. Sayyid Khalid bin Barghash al-Busaid, 3 days. Sayyid Khalid bin Barghash al-Busaid was the grandson of the founding father of Zanzibar, Sayyid Said bin Sultan, who ruled over much of East Africa during the first half of the 19th century. By the time Khalid got to the throne in 1896, Zanzibar was functioning as a protectorate of the British Empire. Around 20 years old at the time, he was loved and supported by the populace, though not the British, who instead elected his pro-British cousin, Hamed bin Thuwain. The reign wouldn't last, however, as he mysteriously died on August the 25th. Sensing an opportunity, Khalid declared himself Sultan. Obviously, this wasn't taken too well by the Brits, and a Royal Navy contingent was sent to resolve the situation. On August 27th, it began a massive bombardment of the palace and defending artillery batteries, killing around 500 Zanzibari soldiers in a matter of 45 minutes before the garrison was forced to surrender. Khalid himself had to flee and find asylum at the German consulate, then a British rival in the region. Number 5. Dipendra, 3 days. Born in 1971, Dipendra was the direct heir to the Nepalese throne through his father, King Birendra. On June 1, 2001, he was at the center of one of the most shocking royal feuds in history when he entered the royal palace with an automatic rifle and shot down 10 family members before shooting himself with the same gun. He spent 3 days in a coma before his death on June 4th. No one knows the precise motives behind the massacre, though a family dispute related to his marriage might have played a role. In a weird turn of events, the state's Privy Council moved to accede into the throne while he was in hospital, making him the king of Nepal for about 3 days. Number 4. Victoria Kamamalu. One day. Victoria Kamamalu was the granddaughter of Kamanahama I, the founder of the Kingdom of Hawaii, from her mother's side. In the line of succession, Victoria was below a long list of people, including uncles, cousins, and brothers. She was elected as the head of the King's Privy Council and Queen Regent, known as Kahina Nui in the Hawaiian Constitution in 1855. Victoria would accidentally come into power on November 30th, 1863, after her brother died unexpectedly without leaving a direct heir. As Kahina Nui and head of the Royal Council, she proclaimed her brother, Lord Kamehameha, as the new king after only 1 day of ruling, making her one of the shortest-lived monarchs in history. Number 3. Modi. One day. The Jin dynasty was a short-lived imperial house during the 12th and 13th centuries in China, ruling over large parts of northern China and led by the ethnically Manchurian Jurchen people. It was a time of almost constant warfare in China, as the Jin Empire faced threats on multiple fronts, like the powerful Song dynasty ruling in the south. In 1232, they were invaded by a combined contingent of Mongols, led by Genghis Khan's son, Ogedai, and Song soldiers. While Emperor Aizong attempted to repel the invasion, his tiny force was no match. The capital, Kaifeng, was overrun and sacked in 1233, forcing Aizong and his remaining forces to flee to Kaizhou. When the Mongols surrounded the city, Aizong decided that the best course of action was giving up. On February 9th, 1234, he passed the throne to his general, Wanyan Chenling, and committed suicide to avoid capture. Now called Emperor Modi, the last Jin emperor was killed by Mongol soldiers before the day was up, earning him the unofficial title of the shortest reigning emperor in Chinese history. Number 2. Mikhail Alexandrovich Romanov. One day. On March 2, 1917, as the Russian Revolution was nearing its last phase, Tsar Nicholas II gave up his throne in favor of his brother, Mikhail Alexandrovich. It was a surprising, even if ultimately futile decision, as he was expected to pass it to his son, Alexei. While state policy was clear on respecting the will of the abdicating Tsar, the events of the revolution had complicated the issue a bit, as most of the revolting factions were against the preservation of the monarchy in any form. For about a day, Mikhail remained in power as the new Tsar before explicitly refusing the throne on March 3rd. It would matter little in the grand scheme of things, however, as it'd be the first of 18 Romanovs to be executed by the Bolsheviks in June of 1918. Number 1. Louis XIX. 20 minutes. Louis Antoine was the nephew of the last French king before the revolution, Louis XVI. Born in 1775, he'd grow up to witness the most brutal phase of the revolution when almost the entire royal family was executed by guillotine. A hardcore royalist, go on to lead counter-revolutionary forces during the post-revolution Vendée uprising, along with fighting on the side of other European powers in the Napoleonic Wars. When the French monarchy was restored in 1815, Louis's father, Charles Philippe, was elected as the new king. Unfortunately, at least for the monarchy, there was another revolution in 1830, now called the July Revolution, triggered by conservative and royalist policies adopted by Charles' government. In the face of growing pressure and revolts in the capital, Charles abdicated the throne to his son Louis on August 2nd, 1830. Perhaps sensing that it wasn't the best time to be a monarch in France, Louis further abdicated power to his nephew, Henry V, within 20 minutes of his father's abdication.